a little bit about my background, like Rosario already mentioned a few things, but I would like to touch upon what brings me to this research space. Is that when I was doing my PhD, I really enjoy teaching and outreach, and making science fun and accessible is really important. But sometimes when you're working in the lab, it's more about getting stuff done, doing experiments, and people tend to lose the fun part of science. But at the core, we all are curious, as kids, we want to know what is this, what is that. And so I was looking for a research space where I could bring the whole of myself, where I enjoy storytelling, where I enjoy art and science together, to talk about the science, to talk about geology. And when I was looking for it, I got in touch with Dr. Ben Kennedy, who's the volcanologist at UC. And he had the school project. And I was like, oh, why not? Like, let's be on board. So today, I think I had shared the resource, the Learn's virtual field trip with Rosario. I don't know if you all had a chance to look at it, but I will be talking a little bit about how such resources can be created. So I'll start my screen share. Um, yeah. Can you all see it? Okay. So the title of my talk is Co-Construction of a Bicultural Virtual Field Trip, and a quick outline of what I'm going to touch upon. First is an introduction and context of the study. Why is it important to me, and why is it relevant for New Zealand and then to the world? And then I'm focusing on digital storytelling in volcanic crisis communication. And then I'll talk a little bit about the Learn's Natural Hazards virtual field trip. What is the research question I'm exploring? What are the methods? What are the frameworks I'm keeping in mind while conducting this research? Some parts of what methods I'm doing, some of the preliminary results that I have found so far, and some key takeaways from my research so far, and what needs to be done further. So first of all, connections to landscape is really important. Like, New Zealand is geologically active, and I'm focusing on Lake Taupo, which is one of the active centers of volcanic unrest in New Zealand. Also critical to this space is New Zealand's bicultural foundation. Despite New Zealand Aotearoa being a geologically active landscape, it has been successfully been lived in by the Maori since 1830s. So what is it that allowed the people to live with this uncertain landscape? And then there is an increasing research going on in this space to understand, to bring about new educational approaches, so that we learn to know about our landscape better. So as a part of this, the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Education funded the Eclipse program, and I'm doing my PhD. My PhD is funded by the Eclipse program. And Eclipse is constantly looking for new ways of engagement with the audience, new ways of engagement with the public, and making it authentic. And by authentic, it means that, like I said, what is it? Because, like I said, I'm Indian by origin. I did my PhD in the US, but coming to this research space, I do bring some of my expertise, but also there's a lot to learn from people around. So acknowledging that is really important, that I may not be an expert in this field, but I'm here to learn. And here we are co-creating this learning with members of our community. So I'm looking at specifically digital storytelling. Digital storytelling can be employed in different ways. There can be choose your own scenario pathways. There can be games in which storytelling component is there. And then there's the virtual field trip. So what we are planning, what we intend to do is, the objective is, how do we build resilience? How do we learn to live with uncertainties, which is a very relevant topic at the moment with the COVID crisis going on. And then understanding when we are using digital storytelling as a tool, who is telling these stories is really important. So when we think about storytelling, why should we look at storytelling? Why are stories so important? First of all, stories can be inspiring. They hold deep meaning and they can reach out to people. If something is told via story, it's sometimes easier for our audience to connect to it because they can see themselves in the characters. There's a lot of empathy. So by using these traits, we can actually draw our audience into better understanding the science behind it. And also, like, story connects all people. It connects the purpose, the teller, and the listener. And when we are looking at these stories, the research question that I'm trying to answer is, how was the Learn's bicultural virtual field trip that appropriately blends two different knowledge systems, the Western science or geology, and Te Ao Maori, which is the indigenous knowledge system, to explore the stories around the landscape of New Zealand, specifically the topovolcanic zone. How was that created? So a little bit of background into why I am again and again repeating that whose stories are being told. Because in New Zealand, there has been a lot of disconnect between how the indigenous knowledge has been used. And so, therefore, before starting any research in such a bicultural space, it's important to understand who is the work benefiting. If we are reaching out to our Maori stakeholders, the people of New Zealand, why should they share their knowledge with us? It's also a question. Why is it important? So, keeping that in mind, we were thinking of like what's the appropriate way to bring this together in this virtual field trip, and it had already been done. I'm taking a retrospective view where I am trying to understand how such resources can be created so that they are more sustainable, more accessible to the people. And so there's this idea of the braided rivers approach, also known as the Hey Ava Feria. Geologists will be familiar with what a braided river system is. It's like two rivers coming together, converging at some points, diverging at some points. But here, the river is a metaphor for the knowledge systems. So if the two streams here signify the two different knowledge systems, one is Western science, one is Te Ao Maori, and how they can coexist with each other, reinform each other, but also not compromise with their own knowledge sets. So it's like bringing the whole of yourself to this science to understand how we can get better insights into understanding about volcanoes and the unrest around them. And it also creates a space for learning from each other at the same time. But critical to this approach is also the fact that sometimes, because we speak two different languages, if there are two knowledge systems, there are different sets of protocols about doing research, different ways of understanding things. So it might also lead to some differences in understanding. And therefore, we need to have a set of, like, uh, grounding factors where we can go back to that space to re-question or reposition ourselves. And so the braided rivers approach was put forward by Professor Angus McFarlane, who's a Maori research professor. And along with this approach, I have been using the IBRILA framework. It comes from some of the work which has been done by Russell Bishop around different ways of combining the Maori and Pakeha knowledge. And by Pakeha, I mean the European. It's like a generic term used here. So the IBRILA framework consists of a set of like 5 factors. It basically questions certain assumptions. For example, initiation, who conceptualized the research, who is it benefiting, and then representation, legitimation, and accountability. So sometimes when there is a point of conflict or differences, these are the set of questions the researcher or the co-researchers can go back to and try to build an understanding of what was it that was the starting point. And it's just a way to resolve differences. And so for what I did was, so we were trying to emulate the braided rivers approach. And so everybody who was part of the virtual field trip, we had educators, we had geologists, we had our Maori stakeholders, and the local EV or the Maori caretakers of the land, who are known as the Tangata Whenua. And we decided, we were wondering that what's the best way to conduct this research. And of course, the university has its own protocols for conducting research. So when you want to conduct research where people are involved, you need to get your ethics approved. And especially for such bicultural research, the university has a two-staged ethics. One is you need to get like the ethics approved by the IRB, and then there is a Maori consultation board. But we also went through another stage of ethics where we co-created an understanding document with our Maori cultural supervisors. And it's basically a list of all the meetings that were conducted. What were the main discussion points? What did we all decide together? So in that way, when we say that how was it co-constructed, even the ethics part of the research should be co-constructed with our Maori participants. It cannot be that if you are the principal researcher, you go there and tell them, okay, this is what we are doing. It's if that's the case, it's not co-creating, or it's not like working together in its real sense. And so then once we decided upon the ethics and all of that was approved, we co-designed a set of questions for two-staged interviews. I would just like to remind you that some of the people who were part of this virtual field trip, they are like important, influential cultural leaders. They like might be very busy, sometimes not have time. So we were also mindful of the fact that we don't want to like take away too much of their time, or it might be difficult to conduct this research. So that's why we went for a two-staged process of interviews. In stage one, we just talked to people who were involved in the designing and the planning of the virtual field trip. Like the field trip was brainchild of these group of people. And then they gradually reached out to a broader expert group who came in, who were on board, wanted to share their knowledge. And so that was the second stage of the interviews. So this is just like stage one was inception of the field trip. Stage two was reflect, reaffirm, and reposition. That is understanding why was the field trip done, what were the challenges during the filming, and what can we learn from this experience so that we are better equipped, better informed to conduct research in such bicultural spaces in the future. So when I say stage one was about inception and planning, I divided the questions were divided into three parts. One was what was the story behind the virtual field trip. So Ben Kennedy, who was like one of the key participants in designing this virtual field trip, he had his own version of how did it all begin. And then Kelvin and Sylvia, who are our Maori stakeholders, and also cultural supervisors for this project, they had their own insights on how the virtual field trip began to be. And once we started understanding the story, we also wanted to know what were the key characteristics of different people who are involved, because sometimes some people might be very skilled at in their like the knowledge that they are sharing, but it has to be a perfect balance of communicating, articulating that knowledge, and also whether they have that mana or the responsibility of sharing the knowledge appropriately. And then also understanding what were some of the limitations. So after conducting like the stage one of the interviews, there were some themes that started to emerge from the interviews. And I've listed them here in this word cloud. So there was like relations, prior connections, what are the knowledge sets, what's the context in which the knowledge is being shared. And you see like communication, responsibilities, tikanga, which means the protocols of conducting research, authenticity, how genuine the research is, or how genuine the person who's sharing the knowledge is. Again, maintaining mutual benefits. What's this shared language? Spiritual safety. So there is like a science part of it, and then there is like a Maori part of what this research space looked like. And so, based on some after some of the coding of what each of these terms meant, I divided them into two parts. One is the relations part, and one is the values. And when we talk about relations, it's like prior work connections. The people involved in this virtual field trip, some of them knew each other through work or through teaching or um, through word of mouth. So they kind of knew each other, and there was also a phase of relationship building that they might know each other from through a common friend or a common colleague, but what's the frequency, what's the dynamics between them? And all these factors are reinforced by values such as trust, intuition, spiritual science, which comes from the Maori philosophy or the Maori ways of doing things. And together, these both lead to this shared space where, which was triggered by this idea to talk about volcanology, to talk about the landscape, and creating ideas, creating educational tools, sharing two different perspectives and knowledge sets. And so these are some of the ideas that emerged from the inception and planning stage. And then uh, some in the shared space, some of these ideas also trickle down to some challenges that were encountered. For example, once relationships have been established, how do you maintain those authentic relationships? How do you maintain the authenticity? How do you keep doing things in a culturally respectful and safe way throughout? So there are questions of balance, equity, expectations that are met or which could be dealt with better. So these were some of the challenges that were faced by the people. And there are lessons to be learned from each of these factors. So I'm now going on to the second stage of the interviews, and I have two more interviews to be done. Once that is done, I'll have this framework will be complete, but this is just a work in progress right now. What just happened? Yeah. So some of the key takeaways from this part of the research is the research, such a resource was driven by a mutual interest in education, and values and relations. These aspects go hand in hand when it comes to sharing knowledge around the educational landscape. And then together, values and relations lead to a shared space, which can be a space of learning, which is also a space for understanding differences and negotiating them and coming to a common understanding of what the priorities are for the two different people or the two different parties involved in the research. And going forth, some of the things that we intend to explore in stage 2 are what are the intentions of the people when they are part of such educational resource, what are the dynamics of the collaboration, or how did it all work out, what were some of the challenges during that, and how has this affected their experience or their understanding towards future collaborations. And so these are some of the resources, like the braided rivers approach that I mentioned is from a work by Dr. Angus McFarlane and Sonia McFarlane. Russell Bishop and Ted Glynn, they have done a lot of work in the cultural space around the iBrilla. So if students are interested, that's something that I would recommend them to take a look. But that's all I have from my end. Cannot end this without thanking my cultural supervisors, Sylvia and Kelvin. They have been so amazing because it's a very new research space for me, but I have learned so much by working with them. And again, Ben, Sarah, Eric, and Dr. Angus McFarlane, they are all just amazing supervisors to work with. And that's all. I would be happy to take any questions if you all might have some.
Well, let's first of all give a applause to Sriparna. Yeah? And the way that we go is we are gonna get